On a rainy night outside a quiet little diner, a young black woman stepped out after a long, draining shift. Holding a bag of leftover food, she headed like every night to feed a group of abandoned children. But tonight was different. In the shadows, a man watched her every move, not to harm her, but to decide whether to offer her a chance that could change everything. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. Briarwood didn't sleep. Not really. It hummed and crackled and groaned through the night like a tired machine too old to shut off. On the east side of the city, where buildings leaned from years of neglect and neon signs blinked like they were thinking about dying, there stood a small diner squeezed between a pawn shop and a closed-down laundromat. Its name, the Midnight Lantern, flickered unevenly above the front window, where grime and condensation formed a blurry barrier between the quiet outside and the tired life inside. The door creaked when it opened, the bell overhead clinking just once, as if even it had grown weary from use. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of overcooked onions, burnt coffee, and the faint trace of lemon cleaner that never quite masked the grease embedded in every surface. Vinyl booths once red had faded into a dull rust color, their seams split like old wounds. The linoleum floor had long lost its shine, dulled by years of footsteps from truckers, night shift workers, and the lonely. It was here, in this overlooked corner of the city, that Leona Hart, 26 years old and already carrying a world's worth of weight on her shoulders, moved through the space like a ghost with purpose. Her skin was deep brown, glowing slightly under the muted lights above the counter. Her hair pulled into a tight bun, frayed at the edges from sweat and haste. A stained apron hung from her waist, tied too tightly as if it might hold her together. Her sneakers were mismatched and thinning at the soles, but she walked in them like they were armor. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She didn't smile unless someone needed her to. Her eyes, dark, alert, rimmed with fatigue, watched everything, not in suspicion but in calculation. She had no time to waste. Every movement was measured, every breath was deliberate. It was 12:17 IEM. The last customers, 2 warehouse workers and a cab driver, had left 20 minutes ago, leaving behind a pile of napkins, empty ketchup packets, and a tip of 3/4, stacked neatly beside a coffee mug. Leona said nothing. She never did. She cleaned the table in silence, wiping slow circles with a gray rag that once had been white. The jukebox in the corner hadn't worked in years, but out of habit, she passed by and pressed the button to turn it off anyway. The diner was hers now, just like it was every night after closing. Hers and the shadows. Most nights, this was when the exhaustion crept in, slow and heavy, pooling in her joints and pressing against her chest. But not tonight. Tonight her mind was far away, across the city in a cramped apartment where the heater wheezed and the walls coughed with mildew. Her mother, Carmen, lay curled up on the sofa, wheezing soft and low, pretending like she wasn't in pain. The medicine was nearly gone. Again. Eli, her little brother, was probably in his room, huddled under a blanket with a flashlight, trying to read a borrowed textbook patched up with duct tape. The last time she checked, he had 2 overdue assignments and 1 pair of pants that fit. Rent was 5 days past due. The phone had rung that morning again. She let it go to voicemail. Leona didn't look at the clock because she didn't need to. She carried the time in her bones, in the ache behind her knees, in the deep pull behind her eyes. Her hands, rough and dry, moved across the counter as if on autopilot. Clean, stack, wipe, tuck away. Routine kept her upright. Habit held her together. She had long ago learned that if she paused, even for a second, the stillness might swallow her whole. As the lights dimmed slightly above the booths, casting longer shadows on the floor, Leona reached under the counter for something she always kept hidden, a small plastic container and a roll of parchment paper. Her motions were quick, almost invisible, like a secret. And in the far back corner of the diner, in the booth beneath the broken light, someone was watching her. She didn't know it, but Grant Ellison had been sitting there for nearly an hour, nursing a cold cup of coffee and saying little. Dressed in a weathered hoodie and dark jeans, he looked like another tired face passing through Briarwood, the kind that didn't raise eyebrows or invite conversation. But Grant wasn't just another man with nowhere to be. He was the CEO of Ellison Ventures, a private equity firm with holdings across 3 states. Fast food chains, retail outlets, and yes, this very diner, which had recently shown up on his quarterly loss report. Low earnings, high turnover, bad location. It had been circled in red, flagged for closure. He had come to see for himself, expecting to find mismanagement, maybe even theft. What he hadn't expected was her, the quiet girl with tired eyes and movements like clockwork. At first he assumed she was hiding something. People didn't work that hard without a reason, and in his world that reason was usually self-interest. But now, watching her kneel down to pack what looked like untouched leftovers, a sandwich here, half a bowl of soup there, into the worn bag slung behind the counter, something shifted in him. There was no hesitation in her actions, no smugness, no fear, just speed, purpose, and maybe guilt. He wasn't sure yet, but he needed to be. Leona zipped the bag closed, threw on her denim jacket, frayed at the collar, a missing button on the cuff, and walked toward the back exit without a glance behind. Her footsteps were light but not uncertain. She moved like someone who had done this same thing night after night and had no time to waste. Behind her, the bell above the front door jingled faintly as Grant stood, left a $10 bill beneath the cold mug, and followed her into the cold. What neither of them knew was that tonight would not end like the others. Something was about to shift. And it all began with one girl who didn't wait for the world to notice her, before choosing to make it better anyway. The wind outside hit harder than before, sharp and biting, pushing against Leona's jacket as she stepped into the alley behind the midnight lantern. The brick walls around her were damp with condensation, painted with old graffiti and newer regrets. Steam hissed up from a sidewalk grate, mingling with the exhaust of a distant passing bus. She kept her head low, her canvas bag pulled tight over one shoulder. Her fingers curled instinctively around the strap. This wasn't a walk for the faint of heart. But she wasn't faint. Not anymore. Leona didn't glance back. She never did. If someone was watching, they'd have to keep up. She knew these streets better than her own thoughts. Past the chain-link fence that curled at the top like barbed fingers, across the parking lot where the lights never worked, and into the tangle of back roads that cut through briarwood like forgotten veins. Her breath came out in visible puffs. She didn't slow down. She couldn't. Somewhere not too far, 3 kids would be waiting. And they'd be hungry. Behind her, Grant Ellison moved through the night like a shadow, trying not to be noticed. He stayed far enough not to alert her, but close enough to not lose her in the maze of alleyways and narrow cuts between buildings. The chill bit through his hoodie, but he didn't flinch. His hands were deep in his pockets, his eyes sharp beneath the low brim of his cap. He watched her take a left, then duck behind a dumpster, then cross into what looked like a dead-end alley until she slipped between 2 cracked walls, vanishing for a breath, only to emerge on the other side. It was like following someone through a city only she understood. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe she was feeding someone on the street. Maybe it was family. Maybe somehow she was making money off it. But the more he watched, the less sure he became. There was something in the way she moved, like she wasn't hiding what she was doing from the law, but from shame itself. That kind of weight didn't come from guilt. It came from heartbreak. Rain started again, soft and needling, like tiny blades across the skin. Potholes shimmered like broken glass, pooling water that reflected dim streetlights and boarded-up windows. Grant kept going. His shoes splashed through the shallow puddles. He didn't care. He couldn't shake what he'd seen in her eyes back at the diner, how they stayed tired but never dimmed. After 15 minutes, Leona stopped. She stood in front of a rusted gate wedged between 2 low brick buildings. The metal was bent inward like it had been hit by something large a long time ago and never fixed. Above it hung a crooked sign, faded nearly blank, but Grant from a distance could still make out the ghost of its letters. Willow Haven Youth Shelter. Leona knocked 3 quick raps, soft but specific, as if announcing herself in a language only a few people knew. A moment later the gate creaked open with a sound that scraped against the quiet, and out slipped 3 small figures wrapped in coats that looked more like blankets. One girl, maybe 9, wore sneakers 2 sizes too big. The boy, younger, had no shoes at all. his feet red from the cold. The littlest, a girl with a tear in her scarf and peanut butter on her cheeks, ran straight to Leona with arms wide and a smile too big for her tiny face. Leona knelt down, the bag sliding off her shoulder as she unzipped it with practiced grace. There was no rush, but no hesitation. Everything she did had rhythm, like a ritual. She handed out food. Half a sandwich here, the warm soup there, 2 muffins wrapped in napkins. Not a word about where it came from, not a single mention of what it cost her. The kids didn't ask. They knew better. They received it with silence, with grateful eyes, with the reverence of those who learned early that the world rarely gives twice. "Here you go, Maya," Leona whispered to the scarfed girl, brushing her fingers through the child's frizzy curls. "Eat slow. Share if you can." Maya nodded, clutching the muffin to her chest like it was gold. The boy, Noah, she called him, gave a quiet thank you, and the third child tucked herself behind the gate again, nibbling before the rain got to her bread. From behind the edge of a rusted dumpster, Grant watched, motionless. He felt something press hard in his chest, something unfamiliar and unwelcome, shame maybe, guilt. He didn't know the name for it, he just knew he hadn't felt it in years. These kids weren't hers, she had nothing. But she gave. Every night she gave. Leona stood up slowly, her back stiff from the shift, her fingers raw from cold and soap. She ruffled Noah's hair and gave Maya a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Don't tell the others. You know the rules." The boy gave a solemn nod, like a soldier being sworn in. Then the gate creaked shut behind them, and Leona adjusted her bag, zipped her jacket higher, and turned to disappear into the rain. But Grant didn't move. He stayed there behind that dumpster, watching the gate sway gently in the wind. It wasn't about food anymore. It wasn't about policies or profit margins. This wasn't a theft he'd uncovered. It was sacrifice. And for the first time in his career, he realized he'd almost labeled someone like her, a girl holding together a mother, a brother, and 3 kids who weren't even hers, as a liability on a spreadsheet. She was the only reason this place, this part of Briarwood, hadn't gone completely dark. He didn't sleep that night, not really. The image of that scarf, of the bare feet, of the way Leona whispered instructions with the kind of authority only pain teaches you, those images stayed with him. As he lay in the warmth of his penthouse 2 miles and 1,000 lifetimes away, Grant stared at the ceiling and said out loud to no one, "What am I supposed to do with this?" And in the silence that followed, he knew. He'd go back tomorrow. Not as a skeptic, but as a witness. The next night, the midnight lantern buzzed with the low murmur of tired conversations and the clatter of cutlery scraping against chipped plates. A trucker in a greasy cap asked for more coffee, a pair of nurses laughed too loudly in the corner, and someone at the counter nursed a bowl of chili like it was the only warmth they'd had all day. The place was alive in that strange late-night way diners always are, familiar, humming, held together by the quiet labor of those who rarely get thanked. And right in the middle of it all, Leona Hart moved like she always did, fast but steady, invisible but essential. She balanced a tray with 3 burgers, dodged a half-sleeping man in the aisle, and wiped a spill before it reached the edge of the table. She wore the same tired apron, the same jacket tied around her waist, and the same look in her eyes, focused, calm, burdened. Nobody noticed how often she checked the clock with just her body, never turning her head, how her fingers twitched slightly near the end of her shift like they were counting seconds. She was holding herself together in the only way she knew how, by never stopping long enough to feel how much it all hurt. She didn't know he had returned. Grant Ellison sat in the same booth, the far one beneath the broken light, hood still up, coffee still untouched, but this time he wasn't there to catch her. He was there to confirm what he could barely believe the night before, that the girl with the weary hands and quiet resolve wasn't an exception, but a constant, that what he saw wasn't an accident, that she was really doing this night after night, like a clockwork angel nobody bothered to. He watched her carefully, not like a man looking for flaws, but like someone watching a miracle, trying not to break it. She never once looked up. She didn't know she was being seen, not really, and that was the part that undid him, the purity of it, the silence of her service. He stayed until the last table emptied, until the laughter died down and the truckers left in a blur of diesel and sleep. It was 12:34 a.m. when Leona began her closing routine, her rhythm unchanged. Clean, stack, wipe, pack. This time Grant slipped out the front before she did, taking a different route. He knew where she was going. He just wanted to be there already, to see it from the beginning again. He waited in the shadows near the rusted gate, standing still despite the wind cutting through his coat. The sign above Willow Haven looked even worse in the dark. One corner hanging off the hinge, paint almost invisible. But he remembered it. He remembered everything. 15 minutes later, her figure appeared through the mist. She didn't hesitate. She knocked 3 times, soft, precise, and the gate creaked open. 3 kids ran out, this time faster than the night before. Maya wore a new scarf, still tattered but knotted carefully. Noah had socks, mismatched but clean. And the littlest Jules clung to Maya's hand, her face sticky with something sweet. Leona opened her bag and pulled out a meal that looked even better than the last, a foil-wrapped meatloaf slice, mashed potatoes in a foam container, and a biscuit that was probably too dry but still accepted with joy. The kids sat right there, just inside the gate, knees pulled to their chests, eating like it was Thanksgiving dinner. "You always bring the good stuff," Noah mumbled, his mouth full, his eyes shining. Leona smiled softly. "You gotta eat good if you're gonna grow strong." She touched his shoulder lightly. "Tough guy, right?" He nodded, cheeks round with food. Grant stood back, heart pounding. And then he did something he hadn't planned. He knocked. The sound echoed, softer than he expected, dulled by rust and rain. Leona froze mid-step, the bag still open in her hands. She turned slowly, her shoulders tense. The gate opened halfway. Noah peeked out, cautious but curious, his jacket still too big, sleeves covering his hands. "Who are you?" the boy asked, voice like gravel and trust all mixed up. Grant crouched slightly, kept his tone low. "Just a friend," he said. "I saw the girl who brings you food." "Leona." Noah's face changed, still guarded but less so. He looked back over his shoulder, then turned back. "She's nice, real nice." Grant nodded. "What's your name?" "Noah." "Well, Noah," Grant said, smiling gently, "can you tell me why she comes here?" The boy hesitated, then looked up, his breath fogging in the air. "She comes every night, even when it's cold, even when it rains. She says we gotta eat so we can grow strong." He puffed his chest out again, repeating her words like they were scripture. "She calls me tough guy." That landed hard. Grant swallowed against something thick in his throat. This wasn't charity, this was consistency. This was love, without condition, without recognition. "Time," Noah added quietly. "She didn't even take a bite, just gave it all to us and smiled, then left." Grant pulled a 20 from his coat pocket, folded it, and placed it into the boy's gloved hand. "Get something warm tomorrow, okay?" Noah stared at the bill like it was a golden ticket. "You sure?" "I'm sure," Grant said. The boy nodded once and slipped back inside, the gate closing gently behind him. Grant turned and walked into the night, his footsteps slower than usual. The image of Leona, kneeling in the dark, feeding children who didn't belong to her, with hands that probably hadn't held enough food for herself, burned in his mind like a brand. By the time he reached his car, he knew. He couldn't ignore her anymore. Tomorrow he'd learn everything, not to expose her, but to finally understand why the world kept spinning, even in a place like Briarwood. The morning after, Briarwood looked different from 40 stories up. From his office window, Grant Ellison watched the city stretch out beneath him, cold and gray, dotted with rooftops and rust. It was all glass and steel up here. Clean lines and polished silence, a world removed from cracked sidewalks and flickering street lamps. But Grant couldn't stop seeing it. The gate at Willow Haven, the 3 kids with hollow eyes and full hearts, and Leona Hart, standing in the rain with food she should have kept for herself. He buzzed his assistant. "Elise, get me everything on Leona Hart. Personnel file, payroll, address, family, whatever we've got." Elise didn't ask questions. "Yes, sir." 3 hours later, she returned with a thin manila folder, thinner than he expected, Not much, she said, but what's there? It's a lot. Grant opened the file. Inside, a copy of Leona's employee intake sheet. Hired 3 years ago. 0 sick days. Covered more shifts than anyone else. Never filed a single complaint. Rented a 1-bedroom off West Briar Street. Utilities past due. Mother, Carmen Hart. Chronic heart condition, no insurance. Brother, Eli Hart, 14, good student but school fees unpaid. Multiple neighbors confirmed seeing Leona walking food to Willow Haven regularly. No one asked her to. No one paid her. Grant closed the folder slowly. His hands rested on the cover like it was something sacred. She didn't ask for help. She never posted her pain. She just showed up, every single night, and carried the weight of too many lives without letting it show. A girl like that shouldn't be invisible. Not anymore. He stood from his desk. That night, the midnight lantern hummed like usual, full of third-shift souls trying to forget how much life had taken from them. Max, the cook, cursed behind the pass. Someone dropped a fork, the coffee machine sputtered. And Leona, just like every night, moved like she'd never known another rhythm, clearing tables, smiling just enough, holding herself together one quiet breath at a time. Until she saw him. He wasn't wearing a hoodie this time. No shadows, no distance. He wore a pressed coat, dark slacks, and the kind of stillness that made everything else stop. He stepped forward, right into her path by the counter. "Miss Hart," he said clearly, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. Leona froze, tray in hand. Her fingers gripped the edge so hard it tilted, fries nearly spilling off the plate. "Yes," she answered, wary, unsure. "I'm Grant Ellison," he said simply. "I own this diner." The tray hit the counter with a soft thud. She set it down slowly, her chest tight, her voice barely held. I know I shouldn't have taken the food. It was just leftovers. I never sold it, I swear." "Stop," he said gently, firmly. "I know about the shelter, about your mother, your brother. I know you've been breaking yourself to keep others from falling apart." The diner went silent. Even Max poked his head out from the kitchen, a towel still draped over his shoulder. A waitress paused mid-order. A regular set down his spoon. Leona's face drained of color, her lips parted, but no words came out. "You don't need to explain," Grant said, his voice softening. "What you've done, what you're doing, it's not wrong. It's remarkable." She blinked, confused. Her mouth opened, then closed again. And then he turned to the room. "Staff, customers, kitchen crew. As of tonight," he announced, "Leona Hart is the new manager of the Midnight Lantern. Effective immediately." A beat. Her breath caught. "Her pay is tripled," Grant continued, steady, unwavering. "Her mother's medical care is being covered in full, and Eli's school tuition paid, completely." The room stood still for a moment, caught between disbelief and awe, until a voice cracked through it from the side. "Wait, what?" It was Paula, one of the veteran servers. Her arms were crossed, her voice edged. "You're promoting her? Just like that? I've worked here for 10 years. A low murmur rippled around the room. Small, confused. Leona's eyes darted toward Paula. Panic flickered behind them. Grant didn't blink. "I know what you've given this place, Paula, but what Leona has given goes beyond walls and wages. She's kept people alive. Not just customers, not just co-workers, children." His voice didn't rise, but it landed like a stone. Paula looked down, jaw clenched. She didn't argue again. Leona's hands flew to her mouth. The tray slipped from the counter and clattered to the floor, a plate shattering on impact, but she didn't move. Couldn't. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. Tears spilled over her cheeks as she stood frozen in place, trembling. "Well," she whispered. Grant stepped closer. "Because you've given more than most people ever dream of, and it's time someone gave back." There was no applause, just a stillness. Heavy, reverent, and in that silence something shifted. Not just for her, but for everyone who had seen what kindness looked like when it had no audience. That night, Leona didn't walk out the back door with scraps in her bag. She walked home, holding the keys to something she never thought she'd have. A second chance that didn't come with a price tag. A week later, the midnight lantern hadn't changed much. Its windows still fogged with grease, its sign still blinked like it was short of breath, and the stools at the counter still wobbled if you sat too far to the left. But somehow everything felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just warmer. The regulars still came, the coffee still burned a little too long on the warmer, but now the air held something it hadn't in years. Hope. Leona Hart walked through the diner like she belonged there. Not because she had a title now, but because she finally felt like she didn't have to prove her worth every second just to survive. She wore a clean apron, a new name tag, and the same sneakers, worn but still hers. The circles under her eyes hadn't vanished, but they'd softened. And when she smiled, it reached a little deeper. Her shoulders didn't fold inward anymore. Her back didn't carry the same invisible weight. In her pocket was her first paycheck as manager. More money than she'd ever held at once. Enough to buy groceries without counting every dollar. Enough to pay the light bill before it got shut off. Enough to buy fresh food, not just for home, but for the 3 kids behind the rusted gate. That afternoon she walked with purpose through the streets of Briarwood. Her canvas bag had been replaced with 2 sturdy paper sacks from the neighborhood market. Inside, foil-wrapped turkey sandwiches, cartons of orange juice, packs of crackers, apples polished to a shine, and soft peanut butter cookies sealed with care. Not leftovers, not scraps. Real food. Chosen, bought, given. The gate at Willow Haven squeaked open like always, and the kids came running before she even knocked. Maya, scarf still around her neck, sprinted ahead, arms open. Noah, proud in new socks and slightly too big sneakers, grinned like he knew a secret. And Jules, the smallest, clung to Leona's leg the moment she got close, her sticky hands leaving marks that Leona didn't bother to wipe away. "Oh," Noah whispered, eyes wide as he peeked inside the bags. "This is real food." Leona laughed, a sound she hadn't made in full for months. "Sure is, and guess what? There's more coming next week." The kids sat down on the concrete inside the gate, peeling wrappers with care, sharing quietly between bites. They didn't ask where it came from. They didn't ask why. They didn't need to. Leona was there, like always. That was enough. Across town, Carmen Hart, her mother, sat on the worn couch, sipping warm tea from a chipped mug, the medication now resting neatly in a plastic tray on the coffee table. She coughed less, smiled more, even laughed once when Eli made a joke about the new school nurse's handwriting. Eli walked to school that morning with a new backpack on his shoulder and sneakers that didn't hurt his feet. His pride was louder than his footsteps. When his teacher asked how things were going at home, he beamed. "My sister's the manager now," he said. "She's kind of a big deal." Back at the shelter, as Leona handed out the last juice box, she heard footsteps behind her. Quiet, steady. She turned. It was Grant, this time dressed down in jeans and a worn jacket, holding a mesh bag stuffed with soccer balls, coloring books, socks, and flashlights. "Figured I'd pitch in," he said, offering the bag. Leona blinked, caught off guard, but smiled as she took it from his hands. Her voice caught. "Thank you for everything." He shook his head gently. "Call me Grant. And thank you, Leona. You reminded me what actually matters." They stood side by side, watching as the kids played, Noah kicking a ball toward the fence, Maya coloring a picture under the late sun, and Jules climbing onto the steps like they were mountains. The air was cool, but the light was gold, casting long shadows and longer warmth. It didn't matter that the walls of the shelter were cracked, that the paint was peeling, or that the windows rattled in the what mattered was the sound. Laughter, full and loud, kids being kids, safe, fed, seen. Leona stood there, hands on her hips, watching it all unfold. Her voice was soft when she asked, "Why did you really help me?" Grant glanced sideways at her. "Because for a long time I forgot what real generosity looked like. You reminded me." She looked down, brushing a tear off her cheek before it had the chance to fall. "I didn't think anyone noticed." "I did," he said quietly. And I'm glad I did. As the sky began to shift into orange and pink, the yard behind Willowhaven glowed, not from the sun alone, but from something deeper, from possibility, from kindness that asked for nothing in return, from a girl who gave without being asked, and a man who almost missed the miracle happening right in front of him. Leona wasn't rich, she wasn't famous. She still had to stretch dollars and worry about rent, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving, she was living, fully, honestly, with her head held high and her arms full not just of food, but of purpose. And as the children's laughter rose into the fading sky, and Grant quietly unpacked another bag of socks and granola bars, Leona knew something with certainty. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones with the most power. They're the ones who show up every single day when nobody's looking, and still choose to care. She didn't wear a cape, she wore worn sneakers and a name tag, but what she did changed everything. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.